With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yoma Daf Samach Zayin. We're going to finish off the last few lines on Daf Samach Vav Amid Beis, and we're going to start with the new Mishnah that's going to continue to speak about every step that happened with the Soyer HaMishtaleach. Loha'ir, that if you open up a Chumash, it's amazing. All the other steps of the Avodah, of Yom Kippur, are mamash spelled out, and like we learned, aside of one exception, Al HaSeder. What is done with the Soyer HaMishtaleach is mamish barely mentioned in the Chumash, as we'll speak out. This is mamish the Torah Shebal Peh. Epis Aremes for this, for that, but this we know from the oral Torah. And the Mishnah is going to tell us that they set up 10 sukkos, 10 booths from Yerushalayim until what the Mishnah is calling the tzuk. The tzuk means the cliff. Again, for example, the Torah doesn't speak about a cliff. All the pratim are not written there. The Torah doesn't say that you push it off the cliff. But how people would accompany the Ish'iti from one sukkah to the other. It's going to go a little bit into Dinei Eruvei Tchumen. We are really going to have, in the Gemara, in a Braisa, three-way Machlokes Tanoim. How many booths were set up? There's another Gavaldik Din that the Yid, the Ish'iti that pushed the goat off the cliff, becomes Tamei when he does. The Avodah will define when, not only he, but his begotten become Tamei. And here also we'll have a Machlokes Tanoim. Is it from when you remove it from the Azara? Is it from when you leave Yerushalayim? Or is it when you come to the cliff? Is it when you push it off the cliff? But at some point, this Avodah is done, and the person and his begotten become Tamei. We're going to learn about the miracle that happened, a nes, when we were worthy, that the red strip of wool that we already learned about in the Mishnah, that in the Beis HaMikdash was tied around the head of the Soyer HaMishtaleach, as we'll learn more pratim, how later it's going to be taken off the head, it's going to be torn or ripped into two parts. One part is going to be wrapped around the horns of the Soyer, the other around a sela, a rock. And when we were ra'ui, when we were zoicha, a nes would happen, and that red wool would mamash turn white. And we'll learn in the Gemara details how where we used to put the strip of red wool. It used to be in the Beis HaMikdash, amazing, and it would turn white in the Beis HaMikdash. How later, for reasons, they ultimately did it the way we just described. And on Daf Samach Zayin Amud Beis, we're going to have various remazim or drashes of the meaning of the word Azazel, which we are teaching kipshutai, that it is some sort of rugged, jagged, rugged cliff. And then on the Mishnah of Samach Zayin Amud Beis, if we'll, God willing, have time for that, we're going to learn about what happens afterwards. How after the Avodah was done, we'll see the Kohen Gadol has to wait. Does he have to wait? How he would go to the par and the so'ir that he slaughtered. He would take out the emurim, right, that have to be put on the mizbeach, that have to be burnt on the outer altar. He would put them in a bowl, and then that's the klal that every carbon whose dam is sprinkled inside the heichal, and on Yom Kippur noch lefnai vilefnim as well, the animals need to be burnt chutz liYerushalayim. How we would prepare those animals, and they would be removed indeed chutz liYerushalayim, and much more. We're going to go to Daf Samach Vav Amid Beis, 6 lines before the bottom of the Amid, by the 2 dots, the kevesh asuloi. Now this is referring back to the ramp that the Mishnah spoke about on Daf Samach Vav that they would build for the Ish'iti. So when he removes the Soyer HaMishtaleach, he shouldn't have to walk in between the oilam, because we learned in the Mishnah that they were bavliim that would pull out or pluck out his hair, and they would think that by doing that, they're going to nudge him along. So he should be doing this avodah quicker. So Zak the Gemara, the Kevesh Asuloi, Omar Abba Bar Bar Chana, that even though the Mishnah writes that it was the Yidden from Bavel that would pluck out his hair, Be'emes Loi Bavliim Hoyu, it wasn't Yidden from Bavel. Who did that to the Ish'iti? Ela Alexandriim Hoyu. Yidden that came from Alexandria. Eloma, so why did we write Bavliim? Now, who wrote Bavliim? The Mishnah. The Mishnah was compiled by Rabbeinu HaKadosh, but it was written by Tanoim. The Rubam were all in Eretz Yisrael. The Bnei Eretz Yisrael had a certain animosity for the Yidden in Bavel. And all that began by the fact that when Ezra attempted to bring all the Yidden back during the building of the second Beis HaMikdash that we will be learning in a few days from now, amazing Agadah, sadly, very few Yidden went along with him. Ezra's mission was to go back and to try to inspire more Yidden to come. And the Levium were punished. We spoke about this. We'll chazar all these things. But look at the words of the Gemara. Mitoich shesoinim es habavliim. Soinim means that the Bnei Eretz Yisrael, they had some animosity towards the Yidden that came from Bavel. So whenever someone did something that's not appropriate, they would call them, you guys are the Babylonians are doing it. And indeed, Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer, same thing, that loy, this is not a Amoida, this is already a Tana, that loy Bavliim hoyu, el Alexandrim hoyu. And the moment this was said, so Amar loy Rabbi Yosi tells Rabbi Yehuda, I'm happy to hear that. Tanuach taitcha, may your mind be put at ease, because you put my mind at ease, like Rashi writes, because Rabbi Yosi, his family came from Bavel, and it bothered him that, the Mishnah is writing, that the Yidden from Bavel are misbehaving. Of course it's misbehaving, pulling out a hero's goizes. B'chal, there's an irony that many times people, right, in order in their mind to inspire others to do mitzvahs, they do it in a way that they break mitzvahs, right? Throwing stones on Machal Shabbos, like this concept. God forbid. Okay. And Rabbi Yossi was happy to hear that it was taken, not him, it was the Yidden from Alexandria. And what did they tell him? So the Mishnah says that Toil would say, go, take it out. So Tana, we learned, and this is another, these are the words that they actually told him. Don't forget, Yidden then spoke, the Amcha, they spoke in Aramish, that Ma shohi tzefira dein. Tzefira means the goat. Why are you lingering? Why is this goat lingering? When v'choivei dara sagin, when the sins of the generation are many. In other words, get moving, and they did it again by plucking out his hair. So they needed to build some sort of shvil, some sort of ramp to keep him protected from the oilam. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech oilam shehakol le'bedvarim. And now let's start with the next Mishnah. Chevra daf samach vav amid beis, second to last line, says the Mishnah. Now that we mentioned that he now is on the ram with the he-goat, says the Mishnah, Meyakire Yerushalayim, from the eminent Yidden that lived in Yerushalayim, Hoyim Alavin Oisoi, they would accompany, they would escort the Ishiti, this designated man, Ad Sukkah Harishoin, until the first booth. What's the first booth? So says Rashi, look inside Rashi, the last line in the Amit, that Sukkah is Oisoloi Baderech. We'll see really a three-way machlokes tanoim, but there was a certain amount. Our Mishnah begins with the shita that says that they built 10 booths. Bnei Adam hoilchim lagur sham lifnei Yom HaKippurim. Yidden spent Yom Kippur there. Why? Because as we know, we have dinim of tchumen. There's only that much one can walk outside a city. All of these booths were built outside Yerushalayim. And as we'll see, the Tan of our Mishnah holds that the space between one booth and the other is 1 mil. Guys, remember? One mil is 2,000 amo. That's the rabbinic Tchum Shabbos and Tchum Yom Kippur, and Tchum Yom Tiv. So what we wanted is that every step of the way, people should be accompanying, people should be escorting the Ishiti. So when you built Gavaldik, every sukkah, almost all of the sukkahs, we'll see at the end, was exactly the Tchum, which means that if someone was shoyves in one booth, he can walk until the next booth and walk back. He can't go further than that. Perfect. So like this, all of the booths were inhabited by people. There were minyanim there. We'll see other details in the booths, but why were they there? So there should be someone at every step of the way, or almost until the end, to accompany the Ishiti.
They didn't find a closer mountain?
They didn't find a closer mountain. So like this, what the Torah writes, I'm going to read the pasuk in the Chumash, and it's amazing. This is mamish from what it says in the Chumash to what they did. It's oral Torah. The pasuk writes, "V'nasa hasoir olav eskol avinoisam el eretz gezeira v'shilach es hasoir b'midbar." That's it. I'm afraid there. So at least the Torah writes b'midbar. Now all the other things, not that it needed to be a jagged cliff. Doesn't say explicit. That it needed to be pushed off. Doesn't say. Just v'shilach.
There's a big midbar there.
Actually, I want you to know that there are people today that, based on the Machlokes Tanoim, they know what cliff it was. Because it wasn't only a cliff, as we'll see in the Gemara, it needed to be a cliff that continuously had these jagged edges protruding on the way down. You can have a cliff that's relatively smooth, because we'll see soon, the fact that it got torn apart, not even halfway down, that's a siman. And in Eretz Yisrael, tour guides can say what they want, but you have these religious tour guides that they take you to the La'azazel cliff, according to our Tana, because we'll see there's a machlokes how many milim away from Yerushalayim. Let's go weiter. It's fascinating. Okay, so the people from Yerushalayim were malav until the first booth. In other words, the first booth was the tchum. They needed to go back. But then he wasn't on himself, because like the Mishnah continues, the end of the Amid, Eser Sukkos mi Yerushalayim va'atzuk. There was a total of 10 sukkahs that were built. Daf Samach Zayin. Now, the Mishnah gives a measurement that's not that commonly used for a reason. What was the total distance from outside Yerushalayim, not from the Beis HaMikdash, until the cliff? 90 ris. Now, how many milin? What does that mean in milin? V'shiva u'mechze l'chol mil. 7.5 ris to each mil. I'll tell you why. It's pashut. So here's where you have the Rashi. Kevin is excited with his pictures now. Rashi says like this: the goal of the 10 booths was for the ish iti to always have people that can escort. According to our Tana, they didn't want for anyone to need to make an Eid of Techumah. No Eid of was made. So there was a booth. If you were Mekabel Yomtiv in the booth, you can walk 1 mil. 1 mil is 2,000 amas. So there was 1 mil until the first booth. All right. Then from the next 9 booths, same thing. You have another 1 mil in between each one. From the last booth until the actual cliff, there were 2 mil. In other words, that in the last leg, the chevra that stayed in the 10th booth walked with him halfway to the cliff. But chevra, when you're out there in the midbar, and it's only now the 2,000 amas, they actually would be able to see him walk all the way to the cliff and push it off the cliff.
He stays there.
And he will see in the Mishnah, he doesn't stay there. That means he went beyond the tchum. But that's the Tana. So that's the cheshbon again. Rabbi Chaim is here with the math. So you have 90 ris. We know it was 12 mil like the cheshbon I made, because it was 1 in between each one. And then the last one until the cliff is 2 mil. So that's 10 and 2 is 12. So if 90 is and there was 12 mil, so kum techois that there was 7.5 ris for each mil. Right? 90 times divided by 7.5 is 12. Stimmt. Okay, so first of all, we got that clear. So they were malavahim almost until the end. The alcohol, another few details. Why? First of all, the Metzias was that the cliff was over there. But the beauty is, if you remember when we learned Eruvin, we had a Shitas Rabbi Akiva, that Tchumen were Doiraisa, and then we learned that according to many Rishonim, even if Tchumen is Midrabanan, but 12 mil is Midoiraisa. So what we benefited over here is that the Ish Iti didn't go beyond the Tchum Doiraisa. He for sure violated the Tchum Derabanan. But he's doing a din, he's doing a mitzvah, what the Torah said. That's the beauty here. Another important detail, Va'al kol sukkah v'sukkah, whenever he came to another booth, they would have in that booth food, not only for in Yiddish, for the farfasten, for the light refreshment meal for the people that spend Yom Kippur there. They would have food for the Ish Iti. Now guys, it's Yom Kippur. And they would tell him, Harei Mazin v'Harei Mayim. Now, why would they tell him Harei Mazin Harei Mayim? So like this, we'll see in the Gemara a very important application of the following psychological phenomena. And that is that which means that it's amazing if a person knows that if they need, there's food available, in most cases, they therefore won't need to break their fast. Just knowing that Amadarf, people that are not well, and you explain to them the shiurim, it's amazing. You tell them, listen, try to fast, but if you have to break the fast, then break it with the shiurim. Many times the taka won't break their fast. The fact that they know that there is a way out, somehow they have more koyach to fast. Now, there's a big discussion amongst the achrayim. What's pshat? Is it that he's like everyone else, that only if he's mamish pikuach nefesh can he break his fast? Many Achrayim hold that he will be allowed to fast if he's weak, even if it's not a pikuach nefesh. Lemashal, just like we learned yesterday, that iti afilu betuma. Now entering the Makom HaMikdash betuma is an isur kares. We also learned that this person only lechatchila needed to be pre-designated. But if something happened and he couldn't do it, then you can appoint someone right away. So one can argue, why would it ever override Tumah? In other words, you designated the Yid. If he became Tameh, then designate someone on Yom Kippur. We don't say that. Even though the pre-designation is only a din lechatchila, it violates Kares, because he's doing what God wants. So many Achrayim say that this Yid, even if he's not a pikuach nefesh, however you define that for being allowed to eat, simply weakness, he can also eat. Even though eating on Yom Kippur is kares, if you don't have to. Other Achrayim say no. They say simply they had food just because of this rule. It's a psychological rule. Him knowing that there's always food, that in itself made him not need to eat. Okay. That means he always had escorts, that we just explained, because there was one meal. There was one meal from Yerushalayim until the first booth. There was one meal between each booth. It means the escorts only went one leg. You have 11 legs. You understand? If until the first booth there was one meal, that means until the 10th booth, that's the 10th meal. The 11th leg was 2 mil. And no one made a Tchum Shabbos. So therefore they were malava him always chutz me'achrein shebehem. Now it's not pshat that no one went on the 11th leg of the journey. No, they went until they were allowed to go without violating the Tchum D'Rabbanan. She'eino magia ima l'tzuk. They went, but they stopped halfway. But now that you are in the desert, there's nothing obstructing your view. So it's not only that they went with him until halfway, but they were actually able to see how merachik, 1 mil away, v'roya es masav, in order to see what he's doing. Now, does it mean that we did not trust that he's going to end up doing it? They were there to look at him. Okay. Depends on the escorts. Some of them came from a tradition that you have to force. Some people, they wanted to give him kavod, whatever there was in the kavana. But the people were with him, even though Begashmi is not all the way until the end, but they were able to see all the way until the end. We'll see in the Gemara other Tanoim that had a little bit of a different sheet. Now, meaning the Ishiti, what did this designated man do? So as we learned before, that right after the Goydel, they would tie around the So'ir Lazozel's head. But Kevin had the picture over there, it looked like a blindfold. They would have a red string. The red string, according to many, would stay there until this point, but now he would remove it. He would remove this strip of redwood. He would tie it to a rock on top of the cliff near him, not leave it in the sand. He would tie it on a rock. Same question, are you allowed to tie it a kesher shal kayama? In other words, are we saying if he can eat, if he can go in then there's no dinim for him, or no, whatever he did, max would be only in Isur D'Rabbanan, so hold many Achrayim. That's also the 12 mil. So even though he's not keeping the Tchum D'Rabbanan, but he's not going beyond the Tchum D'Oraisa, so then he would make a kesher she'ena shal kayama, but he would tie one to the rock. V'chetzioi kashur ben shnei kanav, and 2 he would tie around the horns of the he goat of the Sa'id. Again, the Gemara will ask why that? Why not the whole thing on the rock? Really, the red string did Bechlal not need to be there. A lot more in the Gemara. And, guys, just to know, one of the characteristics of a goat, ubefrat, a mountain goat, they can walk down a cliff. That's the koyach of a goat. So, you want to make sure that you don't push the goat, and the goat doesn't, stroll down. The goal is for the goat to become dismembered. So they would turn the goat in the opposite direction, and they would push him down. And I want you to know, we're speaking about Nisim with the red wool. I can see that sometimes by certain Kahanim Gedolim, this was also a Nes. To see an elder Yid, a 100-year-old Yid, getting a goat down the cliff. What do you think the goat, without the miracle, the goat would allow itself to be pushed off the cliff? I don't think it was so pashut. It was an interesting moment. But they pushed him backwards, because if not, this is a good picture. Kevin with your pictures, good. And v'hum is galgal v'yored. And it was a cliff. So it would tumble down, roll down. And this was a type of cliff. Here the picture should have been a little bit better, because the Gemara the Mishnah is saying it had jagged edges. You can have a cliff that's not jaggedy, but then you would maybe die by the klop in the bottom. It was a type of cliff that there were constantly rocks sticking out that would dismember the shiur. And as the Gemara is going to point out, that this is mamash a choik. And it doesn't make sense. Why would they do that? But it's not divrei toyu, as the Gemara is going to say, to appreciate more the chukim of Hashem. Okay. But now you got to come back, Shlomo, your question. Now let's not forget that there is no tchum, so the Yidden can go from one sukkah to the other. But without the mitzvah of taking it to the Azazel, you would never allow to go beyond the first sukkah. That's the Akira Yerushalayim. Now, what is the din for someone who violated the tchum? Guys, we learned Eruvin. If someone went beyond the tchum, you know what happens? They have to stay in those daladamas. But here they made an exception. It's not safe to stay alone in the midbar. So he was allowed to walk back to the 10th sukkah. In other words, to the one closest to the cliff, and he won't be by himself, and he would spend the rest of the yontiv over there. Also violating the tchum, coming back. You're walking beyond Aladamas, you're walking 2 mil, but at least to get to the last sukkah. Now, since it says in the Chumash that the one who did this avodah has to wash his garments, which implies that he and his begadim become tamei. When does it become tamei? Vaiter amachloikas. So he and the begadim. Tanach holds mishe yetzei chutz l'chaymes Yerushalayim. Interesting. Not when you leave chaymes Hazara, not when you begin, but when you leave Yerushalayim. Rab Shimon Omer, no, b'shas mishas dichiyasei latzuk. Only from when you actually push it off the cliff. We'll have more in the Gemara, more of Tanoim regarding this question. Okay, says the Gemara. Tana Rabbanan. The Baraisa begins with Rabbi Meir, which will become clear is the author of our Mishnah. Or Rebbe in our Mishnah is following the Shita of Rabbi Meir, as we have many times, Tam Mishnah Rav Meiri. Tana Rabbanan Eser Sukkos. There were a total of 10 booths. The first booth was 1 mil outside Yerushalayim, like we explained, so there were 11 legs to the journey, and the total between each booth was 1 mil. So when you hit the 10th booth, you walk 10 mil. From the last booth until the tzuk, there were 2 mil, and Vishneim Asan Milan Hayu, as we said in the Mishnah, and this is the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Teisha Sukkos, there were 9 Sukkos. Same cheshbon. It means from the Yerushalayim until the first sukkah, there was 1 mil. That means when you hit the 9th sukkah, you finished walking 9 mil. The cliff was only 1 mil away from the final sukkah, which means that the Melavin went with him until the cliff. Va'asara milin. Rabbi Yossi, like Rabbi Yehuda, argues with Rav Meir. The Nakud of Rabbi Yossi is that the Melavin were able, without breaking Tchumen, to walk with him all the way until the cliff. But he has another way of how they did it. Rabbi Yossi says there were 5 sukkahs, and there were 10 million. If there were 5 sukkahs and 10 million, guys, that means that in between the sukkahs, there were 2 mil. The reason why you didn't violate Tchumen, not the Ish Iti that can go there, that has to go there, but the Yidden that spend Yantiv in the Sukkah, is because in between each of the Sukkahs, they put the Tchum, which is Gavaldik. Because if the Tchum is in between the 2 Sukkahs, so you walk until your food, that's 1 mil, and then you can walk to the other direction 1 mil. So that's also a way of you not violating the Tchum. The Kulam Aliyah Eruv.
Can't you either way?
Huh?
Can't you either way walk a mil in any direction?
you can only walk a mil in either direction. But if the people of this sukkah, they want to accompany until the next sukkah, which is what he did, so then they have to walk 2 mil.
But they can't walk a mil in both directions?
They can walk a mil here and a mil back, but they can't walk from here until there 2 mil.
So in theory, they can meet halfway.
In theory, they can meet halfway. You're getting gavaldic. So Omar Rabbi Yosi.
Rabbi,
Yes.
Right. Are we to understand that the people that were in these sukkahs, they were spending Yom Kippur in the middle of the desert?
We read Rashi that Ubnei Adam Holchim Lagur Sham Lifnei Yom HaKippurim. The last line on Daf Samach Vav.
These guys were, a little.
It's like the oil. Do you think the sukkah? There was a whole to do with the cots. It wasn't what you think of a sukkah.
You're with a lot of people here. You're basically. How many people are fitting in a little sukkah? Right?
How many people felt that getting a break from their lives is good for them? Depends. I don't know. Could be there was no one left in Yerushalayim. I don't know. You never know. Okay. Yes.
I thought it was 2,000 amos, no?
2,000 amos is 1 mil. Very good.
1 mil.
It's good. That's the mila. They put it like a few masechtas away to chazer. Now, so Rabbi Yossi says that Sochli Elazar b'ni. When I shared my opinion with my son, so my son told me, and Soch Rashi writes B'lashon schoik al davari. He was laughing at me. My son, he had nachas that his son was laughing at him. He says that, hold on, Avraham, he says even more. He says if you're only trying to minimize the sukkahs because you are using an eruv, you don't even need 5. You only need 2. And you can figure out a system for there to be a accompaniment the whole way around, by every group only walking halfway. That im al yidei eruv yicholein elas afilu shtei sukkahs, and that will cover 10 million. Again, the ish iti is going to go beyond the tchum. It's late. Look inside Rashi. It's exactly what Rabbi Chaim said, because you double the space between each one. Because why do you have to have people walking from one sukkah to the other? You can have people from one sukkah being malav in one direction, people in the other. It works. In other words, I'll just give you the first one. From Yerushalayim until the first sukkah can be how many mil? Can be 2 mil. From Yerushalayim until the first sukkah.
Why not 4?
4. It can be 4 mil. How can it be 4? How can it be? It can be. Sorry, 4. That's it. It can be 4. That's it. It can be 4. You're ready to start until 4. It can be another 4. That's it. Why 4? Because you don't have to have everyone walking the whole way. If you put the tchum in middle. Let's read inside Rashi. I know this is.
3 and 4. Maybe 3 and 4. And the last one.
But 1 second, let's just talk it out. How do you need 4? But how can you even walk half of 4 is 2 mil? 2 mil is 2 mil, not 2,000 amos, 2 mil. Guys, 1 mil is 2,000 amos.
Of which direction you go, right?
You have somebody else
in one direction, 2 mil. So you come right to the edge, and this guy comes right to the edge, and you meet him, and you keep on going.
You put a halo.
You can't put 2 mil.
Simple.
Every mill you put a halo. Every mill you put a halo, then you can walk 2.
No, you can't do that. You can't have 2 eruvim.
It could be someone else. So somebody's smaller than 2,000.
All right, Rashi Bekitzav. Amali Imal they ate of Dailonu bebei sukkah. Shiur b'nei Yerushalayim alav anois shnei milin. How come in Yerushalayim alav 2 mil? Umesukkah Rishoni Yasal Krasi beis milin. Harei dalad milin. Shata yochal laharchek askim in Yerushalayim. Yeah, there can be 4 mil. There can be 4 mil.
He says
You have to put an 8 of.
and where you start, that's what it is.
You-
So you put your hand in the middle, so
You-
you go till there.
If you put the 8 of in the middle, very good. Okay, right. Bekitzer, his point is that however they did it, they did not rely on Eruvin. So the only question really will be back to the first machlokes, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, which is, was it 11 mil away, was it 12 mil away, or was it 10 mil away? And then Afkamina would be whether the people from the last sukkah were able to accompany until the cliff. Okay. Now, says the Gemara, come on, who's the author of the following Braisa? That the escort would actually take place. Chutz ma'achrin shebahem, aside of the last time. Shloi ygira imer latzuk, elo oimid mirachik v'roya es masov, keman. So keman is like we just learned, like Rabbi Meir. Says the Gemara Vayter, it says in the Mishnah, al kol sukkah v'sukkah, oimid m'lei harei mazan harei mayim. Tana we learned in a Braisa. Ma'oilam lehutzrach adam lekach. The ish iti never broke his fast. So why did they have food over there? That's why he never had to break his fast, because there was food over there. Elo she'eino doime lemi sheyesh le pas b'saloi, lemi she'eino pas b'saloi. And again, just to become aware that there is this big discussion in the Achronim, if he had weakness. Weakness means that if he would not walk further, he can finish the fast. But in order to walk further, he has to eat. Does that justify eating and drinking, which is an Isur Kares? And many people say, yeah, just like he can go into the Beis HaMikdash and he can take...
He's going to die anyway this year, so he has to go.
Oh, so Rabbi Shlomo is saying that he's not going to live the whole year, but there's a chayin, every day counts. Weiter. What would they do? They would divide this red string. I don't understand. Why don't v'nikterei, that's from the word kasher, right? Ketoides. Why don't they tie all of it on the rock? What's the mila of the rock? It's more visible. As we'll see in a moment, that when we were worthy, that red strip of wool would turn white. You want for someone to witness that. So why do you need it to have it on the goat? Answers the Gemara, Kivan the mitzvah b'soyer, since the mitzvah is to push the goat down, you know something? Don't think that the red wool only turned white after you pushed him down. Kilo, like when he died, no. It could have turned white prior to that. And therefore, if you would tie the whole red string on the rock, and then it would turn white, could be he'll forget to push the goat down. Amazing. It's people think that the whole avoid is pushing the goat down. Again, we mentioned already that according to Rabbi Yehuda, even the vidui is not ma'akiv.
You wouldn't have to turn, you wouldn't have to send the goat down.
Maybe a person would would think that you don't have to send it down. The proof is it already turned white. But it's not so simple, because if that's the case, then what does tying it on the horns help? Because once you are with the animal, you're going to go all the way with the animal. Once you have to tie it on the animal. Even the mitzvah b'soyer, the mitzvah is ideally, it's not ma'akev, but it's ideal to push it down. And dilma kodem umalben, maybe the red, the strip would become red prior to pushing it down. Umiyas fadate, and he's going to feel, wow, we're good already. So now what? So now they say it turned white. So they say that tie it on the horns. Now you need more words for this, because hold on. Even though the red strip could have turned white prior to pushing it down, it would never turn white prior to you finish tying the red string. So if the red string has to be at least half of it or part of it tied between the horns, then when you're misasik on the rock, that would never turn white. And even if it would turn white when you finish tying it on the horns, Rashi says that had to be the last step, not horns rock, but rock horns. Since you are already with the animal, you're going to push it down. Even though, like Baruch said, if it's a simple concern that he might think that you don't have to push it down, then why would it help tying it on the horns? If it would turn white then, evidently, even if it would turn white, as long as the kohen is with the goat, he's going to finalize the avoid of the goat by pushing it down. But if he would be able to do the last step, which is the tying it all on the rock, and it would turn white on the rock, then he might have thought not to have to push it down. Okay. So let's go backwards. So tie it all around the horns. Now you want for someone to witness it turning white, if all of it is on the horns, and we said that we push the goat down backwards, he'll see it turn white. First of all, sometimes it would turn white, like we just mentioned, prior to pushing it down. And sometimes it wouldn't, it would turn white a couple of moments later. So says the Gemara, Zimnin de Gamish Leilereshe. Well, if all of it will be by the goat, true, if the goat is positioned facing the top of the cliff, then the Ish Iti would see the karnov, and he would see the bein karnov. But sometimes the head would be bent, he's tumbling down the mountain, v'lav adate, and he won't be able to ascertain, he won't be able to see whether it turned white or not. So on the rock for the Ishiti to see, but you make sure that the tying doesn't end with the rock to guarantee that it never turned white while he was doing it on the rock. It either turned white as the animal is tumbling down, and even if it were to turn white even if it were to turn white when he finished the tying at Ben Karnov, since he's with the animal, he would push it down. Weiter. Tanach Rabbanan. Really, there's a history. They would tie the whole red string outside the antechamber facing the Azara. Everyone was able to see. And Hilbin, whenever the miracle happened and it turned white, Semechem, everyone was filled with joy. And on the reverse, there's a penalty to pay. That Loy Hilbin, two things happened. Number one, people got depressed, I'd save him. And number two, since it was public, so there was a shame. In other words, shame has to do a lot, not always, it's public. Don't be malbin pnei chaveroi barabim. Everyone knew, so everyone was ashamed of each other. So what did they do? It shouldn't be so public. Hiskinu sheyiu koshram al pesach ulam mibafnim. Now that the advantage was it wasn't a public display, but it doesn't mean that no one was able to see. But va'adayin hoya mitzitzin, some people would peek in. It could be just a kohanim, but some people would, they would be curious. No, is it red or is it white? And again, hilbin hoya samechim, loy hilbin. You see, here it doesn't say umizbaishin. But here it says, but they were sad. So what did they do? Which is what we learned in our Mishnah. In the name of Rabbi Lazar HaKapor, another version. According to him, they never put it mibachutz. Maybe there are different barishoinas. It's not machlokes emetzias, but we start counting from there. And once the sword came to the midbar, now, and pushed off the cliff, or by the cliff, can turn white before, but once he came to the cliff, hoya malbin, it would become white, v'yadu shenasis mitzvasai, and people knew Pashat where he's at. Now, why did people need to know where he's at? So we will actually see in the next Mishnah, it's not so pashut. Many people say, because now that it turned white, when the miracle happened, now the Kohen Gadol can continue the avodah. That's how many people learn Pshat in the Gemara, but that statement is not universally accepted because it's going to be, as we'll see in the next Mishnah we should get to today, that the moment the sword was sent out, the Kohen Gadol went on with his avodah, which would be to take the emurim out of the par that was slaughtered and the sword, lashem, that was already slaughtered. But still, it was good to know that the mitzvah of the Soid HaMeshtalech was concluded. Now, the Gemara wants to know, at least for this one detail, where do we b'chlal find anywhere red and white? So, Shenemar, in Chumash it says nothing about this. That's really what Yeshaya is referring to when he says that Im Yiu Chatoechem Kashalim, that even if the sins of the Jewish people will be like crimson, which is a deep red, which is a siman of a sin, red coming from Gevura. Gevura is holy in Atzilus, but there's unholy Gevura, then Kasheleg Yalbinu. Then on Yom Kippur, Hashem will turn the red into snow white. Just lahoyer that we just learned on Daf Nun Dalad Amud Beis, the pasuk in Iyuf, that when we speak about the creation of the world, so the pasuk writes, Ki lasheleg yoimer have oretz. That in the creation, snow became the earth. In other words, Tshuva means we go back to the beginning. We get a new start all the way back Lamafreya. We become white like the snow from which the world was created. Says the soil didn't even reach halfway down when it was torn into pieces. So frek the Gemara that oison eivarim ma'ahein bahano'o, that they may not be eaten. That's a given. Even though we just learned, right, that pushing it off the tzuk is like shchita. It's not like shchita that you can eat it. Question is it mutter bahana or not? Now really we did touch upon this topic and there's a big question. I'm bringing up a problem. We learned that ein l'chadavar shenasas mitzvasa umayalan bahem. And the Gemara brought exceptions. The exception was the Trumas Hadeshin. According to some, the Big Day Kahuna. According to everyone, the Egla Rufa. No one brings this. And that's a problem. But let's go on. The question is it the limbs mutter bana or aser bana? And each opinion brings a source. The problem with that is l'cha'ira, the only one that should need to bring a source is the one that says that's aser bana. But we're not going with that. Which every side has to bring a raya. So Chad Amar, we don't know which one, but one of the Rav and Shmuel says mutarin, and v'chad Amar asurin. Man Amar mutarim daf samach zayin omid beis. How do I know that? Because since it says the words Bamidbar, Rashi quotes, we quoted before, the one pasuk that speaks about the whole Soir HaMishtalech V'Shilach Es HaSoir Bamidbar. And as we'll see in a moment, the Torah actually writes Midbar 3 times regarding the Soir HaMishtalech. So this Midbar is Rashi's Kra Yesera. The word wilderness is superfluous, and it's coming to teach us. Rashi says, "Sheyehei hefker kamidbar." You need, and it's like the desert. It's muter ba'ano. It's hefker. Mando amar asurim, because since the Torah says the words that what eretz gezeira, eretz gezeira. Now the pshat of gezeira means to a uninhabited land. That's the pshat. The drasha that he makes, gezeira miloshin gezeira, decree. You use the word gezeira when you're making an isur. Okay, now each one has to touch the word of the other. Mando amar asurim, aishtitach b'midbar. So hay b'midbar b'yavidlei, it's superfluous. So he says, no, I know that, but there's already a limit for that. That regarding the soir hamishtalech, the Torah writes hamidbara, the Torah writes nachamal hamidbara, the Torah writes here in our pasuk b'midbar, right? V'shilach es hasoir b'midbar. Guys, hamidbara means to the wilderness. B'midbar means in the wilderness, but there are 3 times. And Chazal say, L'rabois, we're going out of chronological order for a reason, but L'rabois, Noivu given, which is 1, Shiloi, which is 2, and Beis Elamim. It's amazing that we had already a few times in Yoma, the Gemara is saying, maybe that was only in the Midbar. How do you know it's also later? Here again, for some reason, this step of pushing it off La'azazel, well, the Chumash was given while we were by Midbar. During the 40 years, we weren't only by Midbar Sinai, correct, but we were over there in the Midbar. In the Midbar, yeah, by Midbar Sinai. And how do you know the same thing happened later? So the Torah has to mention 3 times. Now, in each time, we have to take it out of the city to take it to a Bamidbar. Now, it's amazing. Noiv given are considered 1, even though it's 2 bate, it's two mishkanais, but they had the same status. Shiloi really was prior to Noiv given. But that's the Seder here. Noiven given, Shiloi, and Beis Elamim and Yerushalayim. Now, Ve'idach, let's go to the other one that says that it's mutter from the word Bamidbar. Eretz Gezeira, you can say to an uninhabited land. What's Eretz Gezeira? Hi Gezeira Mayavid, let me boil Gezeira, you know what? Another drasha. Taka, because why do you have to write uninhabited? It says Bamidbar. Bamidbar means a desert. So it's superfluous. So Gezeira means, En Gezeira Ela Chatucha. Gezeira means that it has to be jagged edges. It has to be not just a wilderness, but there has to be jagged edges to make sure that the goat becomes dismembered. Something meaning the goat will have to become cut off. It's not referring to the jagged edges, but it's referring to what needs to happen to the goat, to the land of the cut up goat. Okay, another taich. Gezeira taka means a gezeira, but not a gezeira midrabanan. Gezeira like Hashem's gezeiras. Gezeira shema toimer maisa tohu. When a yid, when the satan within us, when the yetzer hara, when the animal hears about these mitzvahs that mamish make no sense, we're speaking about we got used to karbanos. But the avoida Hashem is to take a goat and to throw it down and to dismember it. A person can say that, Maisa Toyu, it can mean chaos, it can mean empty, pust and wust in Yiddish. Like it's empty. Talmud Loimer, no, Ani Hashem. Now, Ani Hashem is not written over there. Ani Hashem, by the way, is written in Achrei Mois. We're going to have a pasuk that we're going to quote in a moment. When the Torah writes, es mishpatai tasu, and es chukoisai tishmenu lalechas v'em ani Hashem. It's written later in Achrei Mois. Ani Hashem gizartiv. No, this gezer is coming from me. which has to be properly translated. There's a mitzvah for us to make an effort to understand the max we could, but that's not the meaning of hirur. Here it is that it should not even be oila al datenu that it's maisato. No. It can be it's completely supra rational. Could be it's greater than chachma. It never went into the chachma. It could be that it's beyond our chachma. V'harai Shlem HaMelech says that I wanted to understand it, but it was rochoy kamimeni regarding the paraduma, which means maybe there was, and Moshe Rabbeinu understood it, and Chassidus explains what that means. But Bekitz said that just because we don't understand it, this is the ratzon of the Eibishter. Amar Rava. Now, Mistabra command Amar mutarim. Why? Because think about it practically. If the din will be that those limbs will be asr bahana, so then we are setting up someone else to fail. Because the ish iti, he wouldn't have to, after pushing it down, go down and collect it and bury it. That was the last thing he did. So that means that in the midbar there's going to be dismembered goat. Now, not that many people are wandering in the wilderness, but if someone will come across it, they won't know that this was from the soir. Maybe there'll be bones. They'll make a keli out of bones, as people did. And if it's asur, then that person will be moyo. He says, the Torah would not give a mitzvah that would set up someone for a takala. And guys, we spoke about this when we spoke about the two tziparim by the Mitzayra, and the tzipar achaya, after it was used to sprinkle, they would let it fly away. We had that discussion. Maybe all the birds in the world should be asur, because there is if that bird will be asur bahana. Tanach Rabbanan we learned. Let's go to the word az now. The Torah writes azazel a few times. What's the meaning of azazel? So one pshat. Azazel means sheyehei az v'kasha. Az is harsh. Kale, shem kale means strong. Shem kale really, al pi Kabbalah is chesed. But the pshat of kale is, in English, they say the Almighty. Whenever you'll see kale in the siddur. So that's pshat. It should be harsh and strong. Yachol b'yishuv. That's what Shleima asked. No. That says befedish, bamidbar. Uminayin shebatzuk. How do you know it has to be a cliff? It can be a mountain. Why up a cliff? Talmud loimer gezeira. Gewaltig. Tanya idach. Azazel means kasha shebaharim, the most rugged of all the mountains. And v'chein ho'omer ve'es elei ha'aretz lokach. And the mighty ones of the land he took away. Mighty meaning it's the strongest one. Strong in the context of the most rugged. The most edgy. Another rem is with the word azazel. Azazel shall mechaper al maiso uza ve'azael. Uz and azael. So what's uz and azael? Chevre, let's go back to the beginning. Right, the Malachim criticized the Eibusher for creating man. And we have the concept of the Nephilim. Let's work inside the Rashi, 40 lines from the top of the Amid. Uza ve'azael. Malachi chabala sheyardu la'aretz v'mei na'ama. The sister of Tuval Kayin. And they took them. And they violated adultery the way no one ever violated. Geferlach. So Uzzah and Oziel, when they somehow became physical people, and they fell not only beruchnias, but they fell beruchnias. In other words, that they sinned in the worst of ways. Their sin was the sin of Aroyas, which is considered from the most serious Avedas. So the Braisa is telling us that even for such violations of Uzzah and Oziel, that they had relations with other people's wives, even for that, this Avodah was a mamish brought atonement for all the sins, including this one. Weiter. Tanach Rabbanan. And as we just quoted, Dani Hashem, that when it says in Achrei Mois, after we finish speaking the Avodah of Yom Kippur, it says like this, Es mishpatai tasu. And the Gemara here is going to tell us the difference between mishpatim, question, mishpatim and chukim. Now really many times Chassidus speaks about the other one, there's edus. This Chazal is about mishpatim, which means rational mitzvahs. Mitzvahs that even if God wouldn't have given, it would have been logical for us to enact them. And chukim refer to the mitzvahs that are completely beyond our understanding. So as mishpatai ta'asu, do my mishpatim. You know what that means? Shel malei loy nichtavu. If you go with that, or shel malei nichtavu, you have to know how to tie shel malei. If yeah, or if not, if it's already if not, then you don't have if not. Then the extra loy is extra. Dinu sheyichtavu. We should be aware of that. Ve'eluhain, Now look at what this Chazal says. What would you think are the most rational mitzvahs? Avodas kechavim, that's the most rational mitzvah. Like the Rambam says. It doesn't make sense that there's all this without a God. And why would we be in service to anything other than to the Oibishter? That's dinu. Gilu aroyas, rational. You have in other places Gilu aroyas to know from Chazal is chukim, and l'choyre it depends what Gilu aroyas. If we're speaking about the Gilu aroyas that we just mentioned of Uz and Oziel, for a man to have a relation with someone else's wife, that's logical that that's the biggest violation. Maybe there's certain dinim of Gilu aroyas that are not rational. We're living now in a Zambad Nevel. People are advocating for all types of activities that al pi halach are Gilu aroyas. Some of those you can say the Oibishter said it's prohibited. But the Gilu aroyas here is rational. Murder, not the murder, is rational. Theft is rational. Blaspheming, beloshen sagi nohar, birchas Hashem, that's rational. But then when the pasuk says weiter es chukoisai tishmenu, that we should guard the chukim, what's the definition of a choik? Dvarim shehasotan meishiv aleim. Those mitzvahs that the Satan challenges by saying it doesn't make sense. Ve'elohein achilas chazir. Not to say, chazir is not healthy. Baba maisis. Doesn't make sense. We don't eat chazir because God said not to eat. Now, could be chazir is also not healthy. I'm sure there are many kosher foods that are also not healthy. Levisha shatnis, chalitzas yivama, taharas mitzoyra, and the soira mishtaleach, like we just mentioned. Pushing it off the cliff and dismembering it, that's the Satan is Meishav Aleim. The Shem, or Toimer Maisa Toyoheim, it's taka, Maisa Toy means it's empty. Doesn't make sense. It doesn't, it's Toyu, Talmud Leimer, Ani Hashem Chakaktiv. I, God, decree them. It's coming from me. And Ein Lochal Reshus Laharan Achreim. The Hirur means to be Maharer, that it's Maisa Toyu. Maybe we can't understand it. So what? That's to its betterment. It's such a high level, like we learn in Chassidus, Chukah Miloshen Chakika, that it's coming from the deepest most parts of Hashem. It's coming not from Chachma, but it's coming from Ratzain, and it's really coming from Tainug. And Ratzain and Tainug exist even before God created wisdom. Eloma, some mitzvahs, when they were given Nishtal Shalu, God created a Chachma for it. And for some mitzvahs, the Eibusher didn't create a reason for it, so we don't have a understanding, because al pi Chassidus it's beyond understanding. So actually, you see the godliness in the mitzvahs that are non-understandable, even more than in the mitzvahs that are understandable. Let's go weiter. That was the final machlokes we had in the Mishnah. We learned in the Brais. Regarding the Ish Iti, it says in the Chumash that the Ish Iti has to wash his garments, which means he becomes Tamei, and even the Begadim become Tamei. Ha Mishaleach Tamei Begadim. The Mishaleach means the designated person, the one who was sent, but the Eina Shileach Es Ha Mishaleach Tamei Begadim. What did we learn today? We learned that there were many people escorting him. Right? The Shaleach Es Ha Mishaleach is not the Kohen Gadol, but there were the people that were working with him. They were like. Why would they? Because the Torah says that the Hamishalech becomes Tamei, so it's not them. Yachol, Ishkoyach Yachol. This is for the Gabbai who's bothered with the sun. God is shining his sun on me. I'm good with that. So Yachol Oh, so the question is from when? Now in our Mishnah we had two shittas, right? From when he left the Chemes Yerushalayim, and then Abshimin by the Tzuk. Why go back when he sent out of the Azara? Nisht. Talmud Leimer ha mishaleach. Sending is the pshat that he's outside the city. If you're not outside the city, you're not sent on your way. Okay. I ha mishaleach. Well, sent yachal ache gielatzuk. So the Torah adds ve ha mishaleach metavav. And this Tana darshans the Vav, and it's adding even before. Hakeitzad mishiyetzei chutz l'choymois Yerushalayim, and now we know these are the words of Rebbe Yehuda. So what I want to point out is that, let's put it all together. The Tanakam of our Mishnah is who? Rabbi Meir. Because he said there were 10 booths. 12 mil. What did Rabbi Yehuda hold in that machlokes? Teisha sukkos and asara milin. Now we're learning again, Stam Mishnah, but we're learning this is the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda, not Rav Meir. Reisha Rav Meir, Sefer Rabbi Yehuda. Reisha Rav Meir, and that's the Weiter. Rabbi Yossi Omer, no. That since the Torah writes, it says like this, it says, V'hameshalech es hasoir la'azazel yechabes begodav v'rachatz es besora b'mayim. So it says the words azazel, right? V'hameshalech zoir la'azazel, the next word is yechabes, so we juxtapose them. So azazel v'kibes. No, when do you have to watch? Not when you leave Yerushalayim, you're not Tameh yet. Only when you come to the Tzuk. That sheet that we didn't even have in the Mishnah. We only had the Tanach, which we know is Rabbi Yehuda, and we had Rab Shimon. So this is in between. No, it's when you come to the tzuk before you push it off. Once you arrive there, you become tamei. It's connected also to the string l'chayra. When did it become white? As we learned in Amud Aleph, it didn't always need to become white after you pushed it off. And Rab Shimon Oimer, if he touched not only the juxtaposition of Azazel, Yechabes, you have to get to the Azazel. No, Zor Koibe Basrosh, when it's tumbling down the Azazel, that is when you become Tamei. Then Tamei Begodim. We have a few more minutes. Let's chaparai the next Mishnah. We're going to have Vaitit. The next step. Then
Rebbe doesn't say anything in this regard, so it's very possible he was going to be looking.
okay, I stand. It could be Danny is saying good. It's just we don't have Rav Meir. It doesn't say Divrei Rabbi Yehuda Rav Meir. But you're right, Danny. Good. Right. Says the Mishnah. Now, this is important, my friends. Lest you think that, like we learned in Amud Aleph, that they used to have the red string in the chutz le'ulam, b'fnim in ulam, that they needed ideally to wait for it to turn white, which would mean they needed to wait for someone to walk 12 mil. That wasn't so quick. They didn't stop the avodah. Says the Mishnah, Boloi Eitzel par v'soyer hanesrafim. The Kohen Gadol now, when is the now? Look inside the Rashi. This is very important. Boloi Eitzel par chazar loy hatana l'sidrei harishon. Shehu mesadra v'eres Kohen Gadol. V'ketani boloi Kohen Gadol Eitzel par v'soyer nisaref. When would the Kohen Gadol go now to the carcass of these two animals? Says Rashi, achar shemasar es hamishaleach. Or the Bach, achar shemasar es hasoir hamishaleach lemishu moilichai. They didn't wait a long time. He sent the soir out with the ishiti. That's what Rashi says. And right away, the Kohen Gadol now went to these two animals. What needs to happen to them? Well, number one is, the emurim are going to be burnt in the outer altar. The emurim only. Koren Publisher emureim. And what do you do with these emurim, with all of the fats that have to be burnt, like you do with all the other karbanos, nosnam, bim, mugis, they are placed in a bowl. Right, when we learned in Yoma about the 9 kohanim doing the avodas tamat hayom, so it said over there also the same concept, that they would put the kirbayim, that was the expression we had before, in a bowl. And v'hiktiran lagamim mizbeach, and they were burnt on the mizbeach. Zok the Gemara, as Rashi points out over here, no, not now. They will be burnt on the Mizbeach. And Rashi goes through its Pashad slate. And we're going to learn it in the Mishnah. Rashi just goes ahead and he tells you many other things needed to happen before they would put the emurim on the altar. It was not here. It was put in order for it to be burnt. What happened right after he put the emurim in the bowl? Kiloam b'miklois. He would, according to this girsa, he would take the remains of these two animals, the carcass, and he would braid them together. In other words, the din is, the Torah writes, that any carbon whose blood was offered inside, the animal itself, not like the other chatois that the animals are eaten by the kahanim. It's kachim kachim. It's not an oila. It's eaten by the kahanim. These animals were burnt. All of it was burnt. Where? Beis HaSreifa, which is chutz Yerushalayim. But there was a certain way that they organized the two carcasses for it to be removed. And either the girsa is they braided it, somehow they intertwined them, or if you can see on the side, girsas Yerushalmi b'maklois, that they had two sticks, and they laid them on these two sticks. And other people, v'hitzian lebeis hasreifa. Here also the Torah writes that the people that removed the carcasses, they and their begodim became tamei. When did they become tamei? When did the begodim become tamei? Shita number one is Mishayetzu chutz l'chaimas azara. not Yerushalayim here. And Rab Shimon Omer, consistent with what we learned above, Mishiyatzis Ho'ur Berubam, not only when you reach the Beis HaSreifa, but when you put it in the fire and when the fire takes hold on the majority of these two, of the pot and the soil. To be continued. I just want to say, we're almost there. Daf Samach Tes, which will be for us Sunday morning, 6 a.m. Wow. But you're going to have a couple of very famous Agadat regarding the Kohen Gadol, regarding us getting rid of the Yetzer Hara of idolatry, of us getting rid of the Yetzer Hara of adultery, etc., to be continued.